I stood there, staring down the familiar hallway of my childhood home, feeling like a stranger in a place that used to bring me nothing but warmth. Now, the house felt like a hollow shell, a cold, empty echo of the memories that once filled it. The walls that had once resonated with laughter now seemed to whisper something sinister, something too terrible to believe. My mind couldn't quite process it yet, but I knew deep down that the woman who had raised me, the one I had trusted, loved, and relied on, was the very person responsible for taking Elizabeth's life. My older sister, my childhood companion, my confidant. She was gone, and the cruel truth was that our mother had killed her for money. The realization hit me like a slap across the face, and yet I couldn't escape the flood of memories that kept replaying in my mind. As a child, my mother had been everything. She was strong, nurturing, and had always been there for me when I needed her most. I could still remember her waking up early every morning to prepare breakfast, the smell of pancakes and fresh coffee filling the air as she greeted Elizabeth and me with a smile that made everything feel safe. "No matter what happens, you both are the most precious things in my life," she would always say, her voice filled with love. I could almost hear her now, her comforting embrace whenever I had a bad day, the way she would gently stroke my hair as she whispered that everything would be okay. But now, all of that felt like a cruel joke, a lie wrapped in a warm disguise. Elizabeth, my sister, had been the pillar of our family. She was the one who looked out for me, the one who set an example of kindness, strength, and integrity. She had always been the responsible one, the one with dreams of a future filled with love, a family of her own, and happiness. She had always been the one who cared for me, who protected me from harm. I admired her so much, and we shared a bond that felt unbreakable. But now that dream, that bright future, had been shattered in an instant. How could this have happened? How could our mother, the woman who had always cared for us, the one who had taught us everything we knew about love and family, have been capable of something so monstrous? How could she have killed Elizabeth for something as shallow as money? The thought of it twisted my stomach into knots, but I couldn't deny the evidence that was right in front of me. Elizabeth's death had been ruled an accident, at least. That's what everyone had believed at first. A traffic collision on a rainy night. She had crashed her car on her way home. But even from the beginning, something felt wrong. The details didn't add up. There were bruises on Elizabeth's neck, signs of strangulation before she was pushed out of the car. That was when the horrifying truth began to take shape. It wasn't an accident, it was murder. The more the investigation progressed, the clearer it became that there was one person who could be responsible: our mother, Diane, my own mother. She had taken out a life insurance policy worth over $3 million on Elizabeth, and she was the sole beneficiary. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit, and it felt like my world was crashing down around me. I had to know how this had happened, how my mother, who had always been the epitome of love and care, had become capable of something so heartless. But as I started to look back, I could see the subtle signs, the shifts in her behavior, the anxiety in her eyes whenever money was mentioned. She had always been a bit tight-lipped about finances, brushing off my questions with vague answers like, "Don't worry, honey, everything will be fine." But there was something in her tone, a quiet, lingering fear, as if she was on the verge of something that was just out of reach. Months before Elizabeth's death, I had overheard a conversation between my mother and one of her close friends. It was strange how I had caught snippets of their discussion, but what I heard stuck with me. "Everything will be fine," my mother had said. "We just need to stay calm. Once it's all over, we won't have to worry about money anymore." At the time, I hadn't understood it, but that conversation stayed with me. A nagging feeling began to grow inside of me, a sense that my mother was hiding something. And then Elizabeth, my beautiful, bright sister, was killed. The police had initially believed it was an unfortunate accident, but as time went on and the evidence mounted, it became clear that the death wasn't as random as it seemed. The bruises on Elizabeth's neck, the insurance policy, the fact that only one person stood to gain from her death, it was all pointing to the same conclusion. As the pieces started to click into place, the truth became undeniable. My mother, Diane, had planned Elizabeth's murder. She had calculated everything, waited for the right moment, and then executed her plan. But how could this be the same woman who had been the center of our lives, How could she be the one responsible for taking away the person I loved most in the world? I tried to make sense of it, to find some rational explanation that could excuse her actions, but nothing made sense. It was too much. The betrayal, the loss, the shock, it all weighed on me like a crushing force, and I couldn't find a way out. My mother was arrested. Eventually, she was sentenced for her role in Elizabeth's death, but the legal consequences couldn't bring me peace. No amount of punishment could bring Elizabeth back. No sentence could repair the bond that had been shattered between my mother and me. That trust, that love, was gone, and I would never get it back. Meanwhile, my mother sat in her prison cell, staring out of the small window. The setting sun cast long shadows across the cold stone walls, and she felt nothing but emptiness. She had done what she thought was necessary to secure the future she desired. She had made a choice driven by greed and desperation. But now, in the silence of her cell, she could finally hear the consequences of her actions. The life insurance policy, the meticulous planning, it all seemed so hollow now. It was too late. She thought of Elizabeth, of the smile that had once lit up our lives. She thought of the times when she had promised us a better life, when she had promised to protect us. Now, Elizabeth was gone, and everything she had done had led to this moment, this endless, unrelenting silence. For the first time in months, my mother felt the weight of guilt crash down upon her. She had betrayed everything she had once believed in. She had destroyed her family, and now, she was alone. The money, the plan, the life she had tried to secure, it had all been for nothing. As she sat in her cell, alone with her thoughts, she realized the truth. She had destroyed everything she had ever cared about, and it was too late for regrets. I couldn't shake the image of my mother sitting alone in her cell, staring out into the darkness. Even now, after everything that had happened, I still couldn't fully grasp the enormity of what she had done. How could she, the woman who had given me life, who had nurtured us both with love, have become a person capable of such violence? There had to be some explanation, some reason, some part of her that was still the mother I had known, right? But I knew it wasn't true. The woman I had once trusted, the one who had promised me she would always protect me, had torn our family apart. I couldn't even remember the last time I had looked at her without feeling a searing pain in my chest. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of Elizabeth's lifeless body in that hospital room played in my mind like a broken record. How could she have done that? How could she have killed her own daughter for money? For something as insignificant as a life insurance policy? I tried to talk to people who had known my mother, to understand what had led her down this path. There were whispers, but no one could offer any real answers. People said she had always been a bit odd when it came to money. Some said she'd been obsessed with it in recent years, though they'd always chalked it up to stress. But nothing could explain the length she had gone to. Nothing could explain why she had orchestrated Elizabeth's death, why she had waited for the perfect moment to make it all happen. There had to be something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface. I remember the first time I realized something wasn't right. It had been a week before Elizabeth's death when I overheard that conversation between my mother and her friend. "Once it's all over," she had said, "we won't have to worry about money anymore." That sentence had stayed with me for days, gnawing at my thoughts. It felt like a dark premonition, but I had pushed it aside, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. And then Elizabeth had died. The pieces started falling into place, too quickly for my mind to fully process. The insurance policy, the bruises on Elizabeth's neck, the strange behavior of our mother in the months leading up to the accident, it all pointed to her. My own mother had planned it. She had killed Elizabeth. I didn't know where to go from there. I couldn't face my mother not after everything that had happened. The woman I had once trusted, the one I had loved so deeply, was a stranger to me now. It felt like the ground beneath my feet had been pulled away, and I was floating in some kind of nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I needed answers. I had to know why. So, I started to dig deeper, to learn more about my mother's life in the years leading up to Elizabeth's death. I started talking to people she had been close to, even people from her past, to get a better sense of who she had really been. What I uncovered only made me more certain that this wasn't the same woman I had grown up with. Diane, my mother, had always been a woman of charm and grace. Everyone who knew her spoke of how well she carried herself, how she had this ability to make people feel comfortable in her presence. But behind that charm was a darker side, one that few had seen. The more I spoke to people from her past, the more I realized that this obsession with money had been there all along, lurking beneath the surface. It was always there, but it had never been this dangerous before. There were stories of debts, of arguments over money, of her being reckless in her pursuit of financial security, but no one had ever thought she would go this far. The deeper I dug, the more I learned about the extent of her planning. Elizabeth had never been the target, at least, not directly, but my mother had seen an opportunity, a chance to secure her future, and she had taken it. She had been patient, waiting for the right moment, and when Elizabeth's life was the only thing standing in her way, she made the coldest decision any mother could make. She killed her own child for money. I was repulsed by what I was learning, but I couldn't stop. The more I understood, the more it felt like the truth was slipping through my fingers like sand. I wanted to deny it, to believe that my mother was still the woman who had once held me in her arms and whispered that everything would be okay. But that wasn't who she was anymore. I remember sitting in the courtroom during the trial. It felt surreal, as if I were watching a terrible play unfold before me. My mother, sitting there with a blank expression, as if none of this mattered. She had never shown any remorse for what she had done, and every time I looked at her, I could feel the weight of her indifference. It made me sick to my stomach. When the judge finally handed down the sentence, I felt numb. Diane was going to prison for the rest of her life. The punishment didn't bring me any peace. It didn't undo what had been done. It didn't bring Elizabeth back. No amount of time behind bars could ever make up for the destruction she had caused. And yet, as the courtroom emptied, as I sat there in the aftermath of it all, I couldn't help but wonder if anything would ever make sense again. My sister was gone. My mother was a criminal. And I was left standing here, alone, with nothing but the shards of my broken family. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild my life, but nothing could ever be the same. I didn't know how to move forward, how to heal from this betrayal. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Elizabeth's face. Every time I spoke to someone, I heard the whispers of what my mother had done. I couldn't escape it, but it wasn't just my mother who had changed. I had changed too. The world around me felt colder, more distant. I felt like I was living in a fog, unable to see clearly, unable to trust anyone. I had lost everything I had once known. My family, my sense of security, my sense of self. It was all gone. And no matter how much time passed, no matter how much distance there was between me and that awful moment, I knew I would never be able to forget what had happened. The pain would always be there, lurking just beneath the surface, a constant reminder of the destruction that had been caused by the woman who was supposed to protect me. I couldn't bring Elizabeth back. I couldn't undo the damage, but I could try to find peace. Somehow, somewhere, though I wasn't sure how to do that just yet. All I knew was that I had to keep going, because what other choice did I have? The days after the trial felt like a blur, each one passing by in a haze of grief, confusion, and anger. I tried to pick up the pieces of my life, to find some sense of normalcy in a world that had been irrevocably changed, but nothing seemed to fit anymore. Nothing felt right. Every corner of the house, every familiar street I walked down, seemed to hold memories that now felt like ghosts. I couldn't escape the past. Elizabeth's absence was like a constant ache in my chest, a wound that never fully healed. It wasn't just the loss of her that haunted me, it was the betrayal. The knowledge that the very person who was supposed to protect us, who was supposed to love us, had been the one to take her life. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't wrap my mind around the coldness it took to plan such a thing. I tried to reach out to friends, to find comfort in their company, but it felt like I was living on another plane of existence. No one could understand what I was going through. No one could grasp the enormity of the pain I felt. I couldn't tell them about the things I knew, the things that had happened in that house. I couldn't explain how every time I saw my mother's name on a piece of paper, my heart would stop for a moment, and I would feel the weight of the world on my shoulders again. And then there were the nights when sleep refused to come. The quiet was unbearable. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of my own breathing. My mind would replay the same images over and over again, Elizabeth laughing, her face full of hope and dreams, and then the crash, the dark, cold reality of that night. The horror of discovering the truth. I could see her face in my mind as clearly as if she were standing in front of me. But it wasn't just her face that haunted me. It was the questions that I couldn't answer, the parts of the story that would never make sense. Why had my mother done it? What had driven her to kill her own child? Had it been the money? Had it been greed? Or was there something more to it? Something I would never understand. I couldn't find the answers. And that uncertainty gnawed at me, eating away at whatever peace I had left. In the months that followed, I tried to push the questions aside. I tried to focus on moving forward, on finding a way to live with the truth. But it wasn't that simple. The trauma of what had happened, of losing Elizabeth, of losing my mother to her actions, was like a shadow that followed me everywhere. I couldn't go back to the way things had been. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine, that life was just going to return to normal. And I didn't know how to let go of the anger, the pain, the betrayal. I didn't know how to forgive. One day, I found myself standing in front of Elizabeth's grave. The weight of the years seemed to settle around me as I stared down at the simple stone marker. It was hard to believe she was really gone. Hard to believe that she would never walk through that door again, never laugh with me again, never offer me that warm smile that had always made everything better. "I miss you so much, Liz," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the wind. "I don't know how to do this without you. I don't know how to make sense of any of this." I stood there for a long time, lost in my thoughts. The world around me fading into the background. My grief, my anger, my confusion, it all collided in that moment. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was starting to confront it, starting to understand just how deep the wound ran. But even then, I knew it wasn't enough. I wasn't done. I hadn't come to terms with it yet. I hadn't figured out how to heal. There was so much more to process, so much more to uncover. The truth, though ugly and painful, was only part of the story. I had to keep going, keep searching for the answers that would give me some semblance of peace. Even if I wasn't sure that peace would ever come. It was around this time that I decided to see my mother, Diane. I wasn't sure what I hoped to accomplish by visiting her, but I knew I needed to confront her, to hear her side of the story, if only for the closure I desperately needed. I wasn't sure I was ready for it, but I had to try. I had to face her, even if it meant looking into the eyes of the woman who had shattered everything I had ever known. The day I arrived at the prison, I was a bundle of nerves. My hands shook, my heart raced. But I knew I couldn't turn back. This wasn't just about my mother anymore. It was about me too. It was about coming to terms with everything, about finding some way to live with what had happened. When I entered the visitation room, she was already sitting there, her back straight, her face unreadable. She didn't look like the woman I had once known. Gone was the softness, the warmth, the comforting presence I had taken for granted. In her place was a hollow shell, a woman who had destroyed everything. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I just stood there, staring at her, trying to find something in her eyes that would make sense of it all. But there was nothing. Nothing at all. Finally, I broke the silence. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why did you do it? How could you do it?" Her eyes flickered for a moment, a brief flash of something that might have been regret, but it was gone in an instant. "I did what I thought I had to do," she said softly, her voice almost distant. I thought it was the only way. I wanted to scream. I wanted to lash out at her, to tell her everything I felt, every ounce of pain and betrayal that was coursing through me. But instead, I just stood there, unable to form the words. "You killed her," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You killed my sister for money. How could you do that? How could you take her away from me?" "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," she said, her voice faltering. "It wasn't supposed to end like this. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. But I didn't believe her. How could I? I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again. I understand," she replied quietly. "I don't expect you to. I never thought I'd be here, either. But you deserve the truth." And in that moment, I realized that she wasn't the same person anymore. She was just a woman who had been consumed by her own choices, by the greed and desperation that had led her down this dark path. But I didn't know how to reconcile that woman with the mother I had once known. I didn't know if I ever would. I left that visit feeling more confused than ever. The answers I had hoped for didn't come, and the closure I thought I needed seemed out of reach. But I knew one thing for sure: this journey wasn't over. It wasn't over for me, and it wouldn't be over for her either. Not until we both found some way to make peace with the choices we had made. Even if that peace would never be perfect, all I knew was that I couldn't let go yet. I couldn't stop searching for the answers, no matter how painful they might be, because the truth, as ugly and as hard as it was the only thing left that might set me free. Time moved on, but for me, it felt like everything had come to a standstill. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. But nothing seemed to change. I tried to rebuild my life, piece together the remnants of the person I used to be, but the weight of everything, the betrayal, the loss, the emptiness kept me tethered to a place I didn't want to be. I kept moving, kept existing, but it was as if I was living in some kind of limbo, a place between who I had been and who I was supposed to become. The visits to my mother became less frequent. At first, I had hoped that seeing her would bring some kind of clarity, some kind of resolution, but instead, each visit left me feeling more hollow than before. I could see the regret in her eyes, but I knew that it was too late for apologies, too late for anything to be fixed. What she had done couldn't be undone. The damage had been done, and no amount of guilt or remorse could bring Elizabeth back. I still didn't know what to make of her, or of myself. There were days when I hated her with every fibre of my being, when the thought of her made my skin crawl. But there were also moments when I wondered if there was still a part of the mother I had once known, buried deep inside her. Was it possible to separate the woman who had killed Elizabeth from the one who had been my protector, my nurturer? I wasn't sure. I didn't know if I ever would be. I continued to go through the motions, attending work, meeting friends, trying to appear normal to the outside world. But inside, I was anything but. I felt like I was walking around with a mask on, pretending to be someone I wasn't, pretending to have it all together. The truth was, I was broken, and I didn't know how to fix myself. It was on one particularly quiet evening, when I was sitting alone in my apartment, that the weight of everything finally crashed down on me. I had been avoiding thinking about it, pushing the feelings away, but there was no escaping it anymore. I couldn't outrun the grief. I couldn't outrun the anger. I couldn't outrun the truth. I thought about Elizabeth, about her laugh, about her kindness, about the way she had always made everything better. Even when the world seemed like a dark and lonely place, I missed her so much, my heart aching for the chance to hear her voice again, to see her smile. I missed the life we could have had, the future we had dreamed about. And then there was the anger, that fierce, consuming anger that came every time I thought about my mother and what she had done. How could she have taken away the one person who meant the world to me? How could she have destroyed our family for something as meaningless as money? I didn't know the answers, and I didn't know how to live with the questions. But that night, I realized something. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep carrying this weight around, this burden of pain and anger that had become my entire existence. It wasn't fair to me. It wasn't fair to Elizabeth. It wasn't fair to anyone. I had spent so much time trying to find closure, trying to piece together the shattered remnants of my life. But I realized that closure wasn't something I could find by clinging to the past. It wasn't something I could find by waiting for answers from my mother or from anyone else. It wasn't something I could force. Closure was something I had to create for myself. That realization was both liberating and terrifying. It meant accepting that some things would never make sense. It meant accepting that the woman I had once loved and trusted was gone, replaced by someone unrecognizable. It meant accepting that Elizabeth was gone, and no amount of wishing or crying or praying could bring her back. It meant accepting that I could never go back to the life I had once known, but it also meant that I had the power to move forward. I had the power to choose how I would live from this moment on. I didn't have to be trapped by the past. I didn't have to let it define me. I could choose to heal, to rebuild, to find a way to live with the pain without letting it consume me. It wasn't easy. It would never be easy. The pain, the anger, the betrayal, they would always be a part of me, a part of my story. But they didn't have to control me. I could learn to live with them. to coexist with them, to keep moving forward despite them. I started small. I made the decision to stop visiting my mother. I couldn't keep exposing myself to the constant reminder of what she had done. I needed distance. I needed time to heal, to figure out who I was without the shadow of her actions looming over me. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but it was one I had to make for my own well-being. I also started to talk about Elizabeth more. For so long, I had kept her memory locked away, afraid that if I talked about her too much, the pain would overwhelm me. But now, I realized that the only way to honor her was to remember her, to speak her name, to hold on to the love she had given me. It was painful, but it was also cathartic. It was a way for me to keep her alive, to keep her a part of my life even though she was gone. And slowly, over time, I started to feel the weight of the past lift off my shoulders. I still missed Elizabeth with every part of me. I still felt the anger toward my mother, the sense of betrayal that wouldn't go away. But I was starting to rebuild, starting to find pieces of myself that I thought I had lost forever. I knew that I would never be the same. I couldn't be. The events of the past had changed me irrevocably, but I also knew that I could survive this. I could find a way to live again, to move forward despite the scars. And in the quiet moments, when the grief threatened to pull me under, I held on to the one thing that was still true, my love for Elizabeth. That love would never die. No one could take that away from me. I wasn't sure where the road would lead me. I wasn't sure what the future held. But I knew one thing for certain. I had to keep going. For Elizabeth, for myself. Because even in the darkest moments, there was always a way forward. And I was going to find it,